Yep. All right.
You have a button?
Going live.
And there is a bit of a delay, so.
Okay, we're live.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the internet to say that we're live. Okay. Dear. There we go. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I'm mute. All right. Perfect. It looks like we're live. It looks like it's starting. Things are happening. Things are happening. And okay, I think that we can start now. I'm just gonna jump in the chat here and say hi to everyone. Get things going on my, oh, nope, my laptop's not letting me do that. Uno momento. Just gonna make sure everything's working here. Just make sure everything's working here.
This is always the fun part.
I know. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. The like awkward beginning of thing. Okay, that's fine.
There we go.
That's fine. And we're off. And I spelled and wrong. That's okay. Okay. Oh, goodness gracious. Alrighty. Welcome to our first ever Off Mute with Mel. I'm so excited to be here with Dr. Cecilia Basic. I'm going to do a little preamble first, but first, Cecilia, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing fine, Mel. It's so great to connect with you. I'm sitting here in Halifax, and you're all the way over the coast in Vancouver. So I'm really enjoying the wonders of our modern communication technologies, much of which was invented by women.
Absolutely. Very good segue there. I love that.
How'd I throw that in?
Absolutely. And if you're watching live or if you're watching later and you know some incredible women who have come up with these kinds of technologies and such, throw those in the chat. We're going to share a little bit about some of these women who in Canada, as well as all around the globe, who have invented all the things. So as I was saying, you're very welcome here at Off Mute with Mel. So what we're doing with Off Mute with Mel, as it's our first one ever, is we are aiming to demystify, deconstruct, and really dig into myriad, what I like to call misfit topics in entrepreneurship. So topics that might be complex, might be misunderstood, maybe they're ignored, maybe they're talked a lot about, but we have a different perspective on it that we would just love to share. Or, dare I say even boring. Now, today's topic, I don't think anyone would think is boring, but maybe that's just me. And what we're doing here is we're going to have this virtual armchair chat with experts that are either entrepreneurs themselves or they support entrepreneurs in different ways. I am your host. I'm Melanie Ewan. I am the managing partner and one of the co-founders of Volition. And if you don't know who we are an organization that builds connections, capacity, and knowledge in global startup ecosystems. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about inventorship. Now, that's a really big kind of topic. Oh, actually, before I dig into the topic, again, in terms of what you can expect for the next 30 to 40 minutes is we're going to have this slightly casual conversation, structured casual conversation, talking about digging into this topic. And you're welcome to say hello, say where you're joining us from, whether, again, you're here with us live or later on YouTube. Feel free to ask questions at any point in time. If we don't get to them during this conversation, we'll make sure to go back and check it out and get back to you later on. So, inventorship, very big topic. I honestly knew little to nothing about it before I met Dr. Cecilia. And it is a really big topic though. And one really important part of that conversation is intellectual property and particularly patents. And I've learned a lot more about intellectual property in the past 2 months than I ever knew before. You can actually head over to our blog on volitionadvisors.com and check out an intellectual property 101 piece that we did. We're not going to dig into all of that here today. So go over there, message Cecilia on LinkedIn, do whatever you want. You can get a hold of us in different ways if you want to talk about IP in general. But today we're focusing on why women inventors are not filing for patents. We're not seeing that so much. And this is a very new conversation that's happening. We were just talking before we came on here live that the research that we're seeing, the conversations we're seeing are kind of just in the last few years. The research that's coming out is very preliminary. It's kind of looking at what is the problem still is what we're in that phase of what is the problem rather than the solution and getting into those elements. So we really just wanted to start the conversation. Not that we have all the answers whatsoever. we're just talking about it here today. It's very interesting. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Cecilia Basic, who's going to help us dig into this conversation. She's a woman in STEM herself with a PhD in analytical chemistry who has worked in IP management in Canada as well as the US, from my understanding, for about the past 15 years. So knows a lot about this topic. And we first met in, I think, October 2020. I believe it was at, now I keep getting it wrong. I feel like, was it at Startup Canada?
It was a Startup Canada pitch event.
Yes, so we were fellow judges. And after the judging stopped, we kind of just kept chit-chatting in the room. And I realized, and I talked about the work I was doing at Women in Tech World, where we were working to advance women in tech. And Cecilia was just like, oh, like, this is interesting to me. I want to talk about this, and start talking about women in inventorship. Like, what about women in inventorship? No one talks about women in inventorship. And so it absolutely piqued my interest, like right away. And what I want to do as kind of a first conversation here today to set the stage is to understand, Cecilia, why was this something that popped into your mind? What about this piques your interest? Tell us a little about yourself and why you wanted to talk about this.
Oh, well, thanks, Melanie. This has been an interest of mine for quite some time, primarily as a woman in STEM who has lived a life of, going to graduate school, becoming an expert in my case, analytical chemistry with a focus on instrumental analysis. In my early career, being a research scientist in a number of settings, getting married, having a child, managing that career trajectory, and in fact, navigating a career transition sort of out of the lab and into the behind the scenes of innovation and innovation management in the space of intellectual property. And it was over the years in dealing with a large number of inventors from all sorts of areas, I suppose I wasn't too surprised to notice the fact that there were fewer women inventors.
Yeah.
There were fewer women making invention disclosures, and there were fewer women applying for patents. So Inventorship, of course, I know, I'll share with you, focuses specifically on a form of intellectual property that we call patents. And so that was an observation of mine. And as I say, I wasn't surprised because it seemed to more or less reflect the experience of women in STEM in all kinds of other areas. And I got particularly excited about it when in the last 5 to 6 years, and more recently with reports coming out, that there are organizations around the world that are now beginning to look at this a little bit more carefully.
Yeah. So you had kind of that anecdotal over your 15 years, over your first 10 years, kind of noticing that this was happening. And then the last 5 years, seeing it more so. Now, my understanding is most of this research is more so coming out of the United States at this point. So I'd be curious, and you work within the Canadian landscape, and I feel forgive me if I'm throwing you in the loop of question, but it just came to mind that I would love to know, like, within Canada, has there been any research done?
Well, I am with the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, so CIPO, and CIPO is the office that you apply to in Canada if you would like to apply for a patent and have it examined and potentially granted so that you would secure patent rights in Canada. CIPO has written a report in 2017, a report on women in patenting. And this report was actually leveraged off of some earlier studies that were conducted by the World Intellectual Property Organization that did a systematic analysis of to identify female women inventors in the international patenting world.
Yeah.
And then the CIPO report then specifically pulled out the elements of the World Intellectual Property Organization report that pertain to Canada. And the World Intellectual Property Organization has recognized that the low numbers, for lack of a better word, of women inventors actually plays a key role in the sustainability of economies. And that
Right.
if we've got a substantial number of women who are involved in the workforce, and specifically, let's speak about women in STEM, who are a part of innovative technologies, and innovation drives economies forward. If that percentage of the workforce, women, are not participating in the patenting activity and innovation, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the groundwork for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing this all over the world. It's happening in Canada. There's still lots of research to be done. Like, as we were mentioning, it's very early stage, but I think it's really interesting because from what you've taught me and what you're talking about right now, whoever owns the rights, controls the rights, that's it. Whoever owns the rights controls the rights, and whether that's the inventor or if that's an entrepreneur, whoever owns it's going to control it. And my gut reaction in having these conversations with you was that we would like to have more women control the rights to their own inventions. So I think first things first, we are going to talk about why this is important and what's happening kind of in this space and what we're kind of seeing as maybe hopeful signs for the future. But I think that I'd love to talk a little bit more about the problem to begin with, because as I've been talking about this conversation that we are going to be having with people all over the world, there's always this reaction of like, oh, and which was my reaction as well. The like, did you know that so few women are filing for patents relative to men? And it's like, oh, and then it's kind of like what you said of the like, that makes sense in a horrible way, but like, I don't. But what is the problem? What's really the problem? And I know it's very complex as we started to dig into what is actually the story behind this. So what we've done for our viewers here today is I am a really visual person. So I like to envision kind of a Venn diagram, which Cecilia,
famous English mathematician.
Yes, famous English mathematician.
Male. Okay.
Well, but it's capital V. This is what I learned. This is a last name. Yes. So the more you know. So imagine this Venn diagram. And on one side we have the women who are inventors. So imagine them potentially in academia. They're in deep tech. They're this inventor. And then we have on the other side of it, we have entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial women who maybe don't know anything really about tech or know very little about tech, but they have a tech company. And then we have the people in the middle who are the entrepreneurial technologist. So today we're going to predominantly talk about the women on the, I don't know what it looks like to you, but on the side of the inventor. So the inventor woman, the woman who is an inventor. We are going to get back to that entrepreneurial kind of woman as well. But it sounds like most of the research has been done working with more of the inventor because it's kind of easier to do the research there. And it's a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more like clearly linked to filing for patents. And there's maybe some more like concrete theories around what's happening there. So I want to start there with the inventor persona. And if you could kind of paint a picture for what trends exactly are we seeing happening? And if you have any stats for us here today,
yeah, I'll toss some stats.
Yes, toss some stats.
Sure.
What is happening with these women inventors?
Okay. Well, I'll start just by giving maybe a little bit of a explanation of what an inventor is. But to do that, I need to describe just briefly what a patent is. Yeah. So a patent is a grant of rights that is made by a government. And those rights they are exclusive rights. And these rights give the owner, so back to your point of whoever owns controls. Yeah. Okay. These rights are granted by a government to the owner of the patent rights, and they are granted the right to exclusively control who can make, use, sell, or import their invention. So make, use, sell, import. All three very business-focused words. And so holding patent rights to an invention holding a patent really is a commercialization tool. It is a business tool. And it is a very important one, as you say, that gives you that level of control. And each country will grant its own patents. You have to apply to each individual country in order to secure rights in each country. Yeah. And so that then, of course, plays into your strategic business marketing, your business strategy, your marketing strategy. So it reflects that as well. So, but what is an inventor then? An inventor is someone who is named on a patent, and they are a named inventor.
Right.
It's a term that's used. Who are the named inventors? Mm-hmm. And an inventor is somebody who not only conceives of an idea, okay, but also is able to describe that idea in such detail that those, and I'll quote some patent language words, those of ordinary skill in the art, okay, whether that skill is chemical, biotechnology, mechanical, whatever, so that one of your peers, your STEM peers, can either listen to what you told them, read what you wrote down, and essentially build the invention.
Right.
So an inventor then is somebody who conceives and describes in detail. They may or may not actually build it themselves. Often they do, of course, or participate in that. But it's conception and what we call then reduction to practice. So now I'm falling into all that heavy legal language. But at the end of the day, at high level, and I mean very high level, intellectual property laws, and there are a number of treaties that govern intellectual property rights around the world. Mm-hmm. The world has agreed on certain criteria for obtaining patents and certain bars for what are called inventorship, just at a very, very high level, okay? And each country then interprets these in their own laws, et cetera, et cetera. But nonetheless, an inventor at the very highest level is the first owner of the patent rights.
Right, the first named inventor on the patent.
The named inventors, whether there's just one or whether there's more.
Yeah.
And so then you can have a single owner or you can have a number of co-owners.
Okay.
And so being an inventor is not only a legal bar that you need to reach. Yeah, I can't just name everybody an inventor. It's got to be that conception, detail, reduction to practice criteria. But then once you reach that legal bar, you are then considered the first owner. Yeah. Unless there's a contract in place that says otherwise.
Right.
And so, and many, many times there are contracts in place that say otherwise. And therefore, for a tech entrepreneur, those contracts are something that are very important for them to consider.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a backdrop to the whole game here.
So, okay. So we have these women who are in deep tech, who are inventing things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What's happening in that breakdown between
breakdown.
And and I think also, I'm curious about how many women are actually in the lab, how many are publishing versus how many are then filing for patents.
Filing with patents. Okay, well, there are a number of organizations that are looking at this. As I said originally, the World Intellectual Property Organization is really a leader in this. And it's interesting that you say names and named inventors, because literally the algorithms that scrape through the patent data is based on identifying a first name as being, one gender or another.
Slightly flawed to begin with.
Well, exactly. But,
it's
a start. Yeah. It's a start. Yeah. But parallel with that, there is an organization called Elsevier, which some of you may recognize as a publisher of many, many STEM journals. And Elsevier has undertaken in the last 2 and 3 years a gender report where they do something very similar, and they scrape through the first names of authors of STEM papers, okay? And Elsevier's gender report has come out with the statistic that 38% of STEM authors are women. Okay, so already below 50%, 38% of STEM authors are women. So now we're in our deep tech space, our deep tech innovators. And WIPO has shown in how many of those women are inventors, it's about half, 17% of international patent applications have one or more women inventors on them. Right. So we start off statistically as about 50% of women going into STEM careers, 38% then getting to a higher level of publishing,
right,
and then dropping to 17% as inventors.
right.
And in Canada, we're at 13% women.
Right. Okay.
So that sort of gives you an idea of the.
Yes. Okay. So the research has looked at what is the problem. Now, what everyone always asks as the next question then is, why? Why is this happening? Do we have theories as to why? And I'm going to like put a caveat that we know that most of the research has not looked into why yet, but there are some theories out there that you've told me about. So I'd love to know kind of like, what are some of those theories as to why this is actually happening?
Well, there's sort of two theories that are at play, and there's about a 50-50 split between in polling as to who feels what. And certainly as a woman in STEM, I can walk down this path, you know, in my head and, you know, reflect back on my experience, both as a young researcher and subsequently, you know, moving up through the STEM food chain, as it were. Yeah. But there's sort of two explanations
or
theories. Okay, yeah, because I don't think there'll ever be one clear explanation. No. But one is that women in STEM have different attitudes and ambitions.
Right.
Ouch. So that's sort of my response to that. Ouch. Right. Yeah. But possibly, okay, attitudes and ambitions. And the other school of thought is that there is systemic unconscious bias against women still in the STEM. And I can give a full nod to that in my experience. Yeah. So to me, there's really no clear answer. It really is a very fine blend of the two. Yeah. And it's individual. Each individual will have more or less of a blend, you know. Yeah. In that mix. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I think like when we were talking, you were mentioning about that there's fewer tenure track positions, or women are in fewer tenure track positions. We're seeing like when we talk about women tech, talk about women in STEM, we often see them kind of like falling off, as you kind of alluded to earlier, as we kind of go along that career trajectory. And we also touched on that part of that like bias and discrimination element, the systemic barriers, is potentially, again, all in theory, could be that by the time we're getting to that point of filing for patents, where are women in their career life cycle? Where are they in their potential to be having kids life cycle? So there's a timing element that I think we're also thinking about.
Yes. And some of the studies have shown that for women and men, oftentimes their most significant inventive contributions to innovation translate that as their first opportunity to file patents does occur fairly early in their career.
Right.
And once they've got that pipeline started, it does tend to continue.
Right.
So you sort of get serial inventors because they're familiar with how it works, and on they go. But definitely the first ones do happen earlier in their career. Once they are on a tenure track position, have accomplished their highest level of education. And yes, that does very often correspond to the time when women are considering relationships and having children.
Okay, so we're starting to see some of the potential reasons why. I'm just going to say we need to do more research. There's not enough data here. I am a qualitative researcher. I really I would love, this is like why it piqued my interest. I was like, I want to go in and talk to these women and see what's happening, because we're seeing some data that's tracked to names, first names, but I want to go in and talk to these women and understand what's happening for them. It's kind of the first thing that came to my mind. And I think what was also interesting, I have in my notes here that you, something that you had mentioned in our conversation is that that when people bring up issues around like maybe they're not getting patents because of cost and because of these things, those are gender neutral issues, and we're going to put a pin in that and not talk about that here today. But that's not like, that seems like an obvious thing to say, but there's something deeper going on here that we don't really know what it is. Now, the next kind of maybe obvious question, I think, like, especially myself working within kind of the gender space and having all these conversations, we automatically are like, this is important, we need to address this. But I think like sometimes we don't even stop and ask that, but it's something that I was like, this might be controversial, but why is this even important? Why should we even care? And I'm just gonna like, that goes against like all of my like the feminist grains in my body, but I'm gonna just say like, why should we care? And I have my thoughts on it. But I think like, I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of, I think you've already kind of touched on it with like the business element of it, but if there's anything else that you wanted to elaborate on why this might be important to do more research on, to just kind of like continue having this conversation.
Well, excellent question. And I think that I would just sort of like to respond by saying that in my experience as a intellectual property advisor with SIPO, where I engage directly with entrepreneurs in the local ecosystem, I'm happy to say that I see about an even split of women in tech companies who do come to me for information about patenting.
So
this is a very wonderful piece of good news. And indeed, women have been slowly making gains in applying for patents and being inventors since the early 2000s. Not a lot, a couple of percentage points, but we're up to 17% worldwide. And that's an improvement over the single digits, about a decade ago or 20 years ago. So it's exciting for me to see that level of engagement. And I think that having people be educated and made aware of the importance of intellectual property in a business strategy and the different types of intellectual property protections that they can avail of themselves of is very important. And the more we can drive that knowledge down, from the tech entrepreneur first starting out, earlier down into their education or experience, so that it is something that is more familiar, more fluid, and more top of mind. And certainly SIPO's, that's one of the main drivers of SIPO's IP awareness and education program, indeed, to bring that awareness in as early as possible and as widespread as possible, for all companies, but with a target on women and high tech companies. So education and awareness and taking the mystery out of what this is a big part of the solution. In my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And I think for me also, having worked with so many women in tech and hearing your story as well, and kind of hearing when this is happening in that career life cycle and all of the pieces, and I'm kind of like forming my own theories, is that for me, this like low number of women who are filing for patents becomes, I think I mentioned earlier, to me, this is a symptom of an upstream issue. It's something that like we could look at as just another kind of a data point to demonstrate a lot of the other issues that we're seeing for women in STEM and women in tech and where they're falling off in their careers. And I think because of like cultural and systemic issues and lots of other things, there's so many things going on. And so I think it's kind of like an interesting and maybe overlooked kind of data point in that story.
And sort of further to your spectrum of sort of the high-tech woman inventor in the lab at whatever stage of her career, who may be the person or someone associated with her research work, then spins off a company. So now, as you say, they're a tech entrepreneur. So they're both an inventor, very hands-on in the technology, and now they've spun up a company based around that technology. And then there would be the tech entrepreneurs you had said, who is a woman who may not be an inventor herself, but is running a tech company. And to me, all of those people require the same level of awareness and knowledge of how the system works, the importance of it, and understanding that the inventor may be the first owner, but the tech entrepreneur under contract will now be the owner. And it's all just a circle of engagement. And without a doubt, it would be extremely difficult for a tech entrepreneur to not have a close relationship with their inventors. Because that it is a back and forth engagement that is directly reflected in the patenting process. So many degrees of expertise are required in the physical process of getting a patent and the insights of the inventors, but also it's the tech entrepreneur, also together with the inventors, in figuring out what their intellectual property strategy is, what is the proper protection to have to meet the ultimate business goals. So it is a very close, very intimate, very important engagement, whether that person is wearing the same hat, entrepreneur and inventor, or they're two separate people.
Yeah.
And they need to engage very, very closely together because the inventor is going to see potential technologically, and the entrepreneur is going to see the potential business-wise and market-wise, and the two minds work together.
And I think it's really interesting then if we come back to that, to what you said earlier and the Venn diagram and these kind of like other personas, I think that it's sounding like there are potential lessons learned. And I'm not the only one who kind of was like, oh, is this a thing? I was hoping,
you're not alone.
I was hoping I was the first one to think of it, but I wasn't. But I was like, oh, if we're seeing more of these like women in tech, or what am I trying to say? Tech entrepreneurs, women who are tech entrepreneurs who are anecdotally filing for more patents relative to just the inventor, the woman who's an inventor. What can we learn from that? And what was really cool is that Cecilia told me about that I'm not the only person who's thinking about this and thinking about how do we bring entrepreneurial thinking into the lab. So I'm curious if you have, I know there's kind of like a few like hopeful points out there. Like what are some lessons learned? What's happening in Canada that's kind of maybe hopeful that we can start really ideating on how can we learn more about this, but also what like kind of strategies can we start testing out and what can we learn from those like entrepreneurial tech entrepreneurs and bring that we can then hopefully bring that over into the lab.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly going to, get back onto the idea of bringing awareness and education on intellectual property down into the laboratory environment and the business school environments. And where is that cross engagement happening early on, even down into high school? To have people understand that this is just a part of how innovative economies work. Without a patenting system, you don't have that. And so certainly I had mentioned CPO's IP Awareness and Education Program. There's also, and of course, there are growing resources from a number of organizations around the world on the fundamentals of intellectual property.
Right.
But in terms of, what are some strategies and tools that we can use to drive this into the lab? There is an organization called the Association of University Technology Managers, otherwise affectionately known as AUTM. And they have actually leveraging off of the Elsevier gender analysis study that I had told you about earlier. And as the organization for the professionals who are at the interface of pushing early stage, deep tech, high tech, STEM innovation out into the marketplace, they have come up with a toolkit that helps to empower women in the lab to participate and take leadership roles in innovation and commercialization. So once again, it's about getting the word out. And sort of as a STEM person who then moved to, intellectual property management, at the risk of making a gross overgeneralization, we all do tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side. We're more happy in the lab, and I am very happy in front of a contract. So we IP professionals, sometimes are just a little bit too hidden. Until we're needed. And then some people don't even know that we exist.
And that's why we brought you on here.
And that's why you brought me on here, to let you know that we're the behind the scenes people that are pushing those contracts behind innovation, whether it's development or commercialization or starting a company or what have you, but definitely being more of a resource for getting the word out. And also, I just kind of say, to sort of make intellectual property fun. I had, not that you want to, oversimplify a complex topic, but I did get a wonderful compliment from a client a couple of weeks ago that said, "You make IP fun," and maybe we ought to get a banner for that. But one of the ways of making it fun, if I could just take a few moments, is to really to highlight some of the innovations that women have made. And there are places that are doing this. The United States Patent and Trademark Office actually has a National Academy of Inventors, but it doesn't split out males or females, but you can pop in there and see things. So I thought I would share a few stories further
Yes,
to
please
my,
do.
how was our conversation today enabled? Well, most of us are probably using some form of wireless technology today. And believe it or not, it was Hedy Lamarr, who was an actress, who had absolutely no background in math or science, who at the age of 28 in 1942 filed her first patent called Secret Communication System, which was a system for radio-controlled frequency hopping for torpedo guidance for the US Navy during World War II.
Mm.
But her patent, which she gave away to the US Navy, by the way, her patent has formed the foundation for top secret military and diplomatic communications, GPS, the internet, Wi-Fi, satellite communication systems, and wireless communication. Mm. And I like to highlight Hedy Lamarr because we all have, the image of her, of a bombshell Hollywood actress, which of course she was. But you know what? Don't judge a package by its cover.
You can be more than one thing.
You can be more than one thing. Extremely significant contribution. Mm. Yvonne Brill is I pulled her out. I had to dig a little bit, but I found her. She's from Winnipeg, which is where I'm from. Yay, Winnipeg. If my mother were here, she'd be so proud that I'm from Winnipeg. Very, very proud people in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Okay, so Yvonne Brill, doctor, was a chemical engineer and a jet propulsion scientist, a rocket scientist, in short. In 1967, she designed and patented the hydrazine Risto jet propulsion system. And it is used today on every satellite.
All right.
To keep them in orbit. Her propulsion system was used in the first weather satellite. And where would it be with our satellites? Can't communicate without the satellite. We're all going over them right now.
Yeah.
The space shuttle, as well as the Mars Observer mission to Mars. Again, just a handful. Shirley Ann Jackson, African-American theoretical physicist. She's got so many awards and I can't even begin to list them. But a theoretical physicist who developed the technology between touch-tone phones, caller ID, call waiting, solar cells, and fiber optic cables. Yeah. Probably using some of those today too. Probably. And then last but not least, and more recently in the news, there is Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier, two co-inventors of what is considered to be probably the century's biggest breakthrough technology, which is CRISPR, the gene editing technology.
Right.
And I think that we need to really, when we tell these stories, we need to put some more of these stories out there for old inventions and recent, with the caveat that I ask that people please try not to focus on the wringer washing machine, the vacuum cleaner, the electric fridge. I'm not saying that those aren't important inventions by women, because they have obviously made huge impacts in our lives.
Yes.
And historically, women did
probably notice the problems with those things
in the domestic arts, etc.
Yes.
So again, not wanting to downplay those contributions at all, but I really think that putting that focus on these women who have made such major breakthroughs in our higher tech is important and may make it fun. And they're all inventors.
Yeah. Okay, so make IP fun. That's what I'm hearing. Have more education, bring like business thinking into the lab, bring IP thinking into the business schools, have more conversations like this. Let's get more women as leads in faculty, and or as I think you mentioned before, also having more women as scientific advisors even.
Yes.
There's like working on that piece of it. There's so many different elements to this. And also doing more research. So let's go into those women-led labs. Let's sit down and talk with these people. Let's talk with all the people in that Venn diagram and see what's going on and where they learned about, what they think about as IP and what are any barriers. And I have so many questions.
And personally, sort of reflecting back on my life experience, to acknowledge, recognize, and not fear the leaky pipeline. of how women advance and drop out, advance and drop out, advance and drop out. That's the reality. And the only way we're going to change it is to embrace that, acknowledge it,
and then make a strategy.
And push through like we've always done.
I think like it's interesting. I've been thinking about this a lot lately about, I know it can feel very disheartening when we talk a lot about systemic issues and it feels like we can't do anything about it. And whenever I do talks on this, people say, can you like do a positive spin at the end? But to me, I'm like, honestly, me knowing about this empowers me because then I know what I'm going up against and I can create a strategy. And yes, we're going to continue to work on the systemic barriers. There are people out there who are doing that. If you want to do that, feel free to contact us and we can find someone that you can work with, including Women in Tech World, my non-volition hat world. But there's people working on the systemic piece. There's things we can do for each other. And there's just so much that we can do. And I think acknowledging and recognizing the reality of the situation is a big first step in feeling like we can actually tackle those next steps. It doesn't do anyone any favors to just be like, it's just, there's a problem, but whatever, like we'll just continue to drop out and that's fine. So thank you so much. I think our thesis here today, if anyone's missed it, is that patenting needs to be top of mind for women technologists early on, whether they do go down the patenting route or not, at least knowing what is there and what it means and what it can provide to you, understanding kind of what that control and ownership means for you and like potential future business, for being, a part of that economy. Again, the feminist rearing its head in me is like having more women participating actively in the economy and having having that ability to control and own and sell and license and export is very important. I know there's lots of different ways to do that though, and patenting is not the only way, but one of the ways to be aware of. So I think it's really interesting. Again, kind of still at the beginning of the conversation, but I feel absolutely honored and privileged to have had you here, to have learned so much from you in just the last couple of months. Even it's something I've been reaching out to all of my network, being like, did you know this is a problem? Would you like to talk about this? Like all across Canada and Europe being like, did you know? And what's interesting is they're coming back saying, in our cohort of women, typically these are entrepreneurial groups, and they're like, actually, yes, we do have women in our cohort who have talked about patenting and don't really know much about it. And it is kind of like this big, hairy, scary topic that we don't know things about. And we have seen this as a problem, but no one's ever asked me that. This is the first time anyone's brought up like women and issues around patenting relative to other genders who are well, and I'm actually assuming that the research probably only looked at women. Didn't look at all
well, it was just basically a general identity of names, but it's a start. It's a start.
This is the point. It's a start. Really appreciate it.
It's statistical. It's all good.
Yes, and I appreciate having this conversation so much. I think before we wrap up, I'd love to know, is there anything that we didn't touch on here today that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we kind of covered, what we've been talking about. I'd just like to close to echo your point. Reach out to people who know about patenting, and certainly, with SIPO, reach out to women who have patented, start the conversation, ask what this is all about, because that's where it begins.
And how can people get in touch with you if they've liked what they've heard here today?
Well, you can go to SIPO's website or just Google SIPO IPA Intellectual Property Advisors, and our contact information should come up, or the way in which to patch through it should come up.
Okay, perfect. Last but not least, I always like to ask, is there anything that we can do to support you here today as your community, Cecilia?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, just knowing that there's a supportive listening community out there. As I say, sometimes I'm sort of behind the scenes, with my nose in a contract somewhere, reading intellectual property ownership terms. And this was just a thrill to be out here today and to know that there's an interest in this. And I would appreciate hearing any and all feedback up to and including interesting stories about women inventors.
Yes. Okay. We're going to do a call out for that on our socials, I think.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah. Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Cecilia Basic. It was great to have you here.
Awesome.
And thank you to everyone who's watching. Again, if you're watching live, if you're watching later on, feel free to jump in the chat, say hi, share your stories, share your questions. We'll be monitoring that. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a really great day, and I will see you at our next Off Mute with Mel, which we don't have a date yet, but it's going to be in March, and we'll let you know more about that. It was an absolute pleasure, Cecilia. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. It was great. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.